The steps that we took at the Colorado Department of Revenue to create a data-driven culture really started with a conversation. So I sit somewhere in the middle of the organization where I interface with both the data stewards as well as our executive leadership team. And the conversation that needed to be had wasn't necessarily between myself and the data stewards or myself and the executive leadership. It was the conversation between executive leadership and the data stewards. And I was just merely that bridge. Once we were able to resolve that, executive leadership understood, as I like to say, how the sausage was made. They understood how the data stewards and the data analysts were playing with data, the different challenges, the skills gaps, and vice versa. The data stewards understood, well, while data is a priority, there's a lot of other things that we're doing at the division level or we're doing across the department that also have resource constraints and also have different project constraints and whatnot. So data might have to take a little bit of a back seat. But what really ended up happening was data became the conversation piece and it became the focal point because a lot of these technology initiatives all involved data, whether it was internal productivity data or it was somehow external or tied to the industry that we serve. So the executive leadership actually changed their narrative and said, well, okay, before we were maybe more focused on just this initiative, we really didn't think about data, we didn't really think about the implications of collecting data, storing data, things like that. But now that's at the forefront of this. That's at the focal point of this. So now those data folks do have a seat at the table and are able to work with their executive directors across all of our 9 different divisions. A data-driven culture has helped us, the Department of Revenue, be able to shift and be more efficient through service delivery because now we actually know where our data lives. There's a lot of anecdotal information, archived information, institutional knowledge all across governments. That's not a problem that's necessarily specific to the Department of Revenue. So what we had to do was we had to sit down with each of our data stewards, understand where data lived, created a data inventory. Then we started tying ownership and roles and responsibilities to each one of those data assets. And it allowed us to then better understand and have somebody who was an expert in that specific data asset to then be able to provide a better service to our customers because we had somebody who actually understood the data, had the full lineage, really was able to bring that information to light and not just have it as, a dashboard that was static and really wasn't usable. It's now a place where we actually know where our information lives, we know where we're storing it, who's responsible for it, and we can act very quickly when we see changes in the data or changes in trends and be able to give our customers the best possible service. Well, while I don't know as much about Ohio and how the state operates and all the different, IT components, because for us in the state of Colorado, we have a centralized IT team, OIT, and they're really the ones that help with cyber and a lot of the stack management, at the division, department level. We're managing our data. We have access to all of those systems, but I don't know if the state of Ohio is set up similarly. So one of the things that I would say is if it is set up that way, ensuring alignment and collaboration with that IT department is going to be number one because they are the gatekeepers. They have access to the entire stack. They're the ones that are really protecting the information, protecting the agencies. But if it's set up differently where there is IT in the mix, I would go back to the same conversation that I had earlier, the same statement I made earlier, was making sure that you're always having your data folks with a seat at the table, ensuring alignment with them. When you start doing your data road mapping for your division, your department, your section, however things are divvied up, you have those data folks in the room so that they can tell you, well, this project over here is very technology heavy and here are some of the different implications and really inform what that timeline looks like so that there's not a lot of waste and also we don't have to do any rework. But also having those considerations and understanding if there's a data governance policy in place or there's some sort of framework in place, we're adhering to that. And without those data folks in the room, there can be a lot of decisions that are being made that create a lot of inefficiencies or create harm potentially through data loss or any type of breaches. Bring your data folks, call the nerds. That's I always love saying that if you're an executive and you are now inheriting a program or you've been a part of the program for a while and you're just trying to figure out, well, how do we make things more technologically advanced? How do we become more data driven? ask the nerds. We could sit here as an executive or even me as middle management with a crystal ball and try to read the tea leaves and try to figure out how to make this work. But the only way we're going to do that is by having the conversation with the data folks. So bringing those people in, setting up groups where the data stewards are able to interact with one another, but also having a separate forum where that data steward, the analyst, the architect have a seat at the table with their executives. So again, to do a lot of that development of the dashboards or doing development of roadmaps, things like that, it's going to make all the difference. Oh, AI is, since 2022, it's been the top of the order with most of these conferences is AI this, AI that. With the recent executive order where you have innovation being marked as the #1 component, that creates a lot of risk, and not seeing a lot of verbiage around responsible AI adoption or responsible AI use. You almost have to take a couple steps back and think about, where does data governance come in? Where does AI governance come in? Making sure that if you are going to be leveraging AI, you're doing it responsibly. Your data is well organized, well cataloged, metadata tagging. You've got everything squared away, and then you can start deploying AI. Because otherwise, you're going to get some really weird insights, or you're going to have people accessing data that they shouldn't. So, as much as AI will be one of the most groundbreaking technologies to ever hit government or really any industry, we need to make sure that there's good governance in place before we start deploying it. So when I work with vendors, or I've talked with vendors through our procurement process, our procurement folks handle most of that, but whenever I've spoken with them at different conferences, it feels like a lot of times vendors just want to pitch a product. They want to pitch a tool. They don't want to sit down and listen to understand what is the actual problem that you have and trying to get to the heart of that problem. It becomes this, putting the cart before the horse type conversation. So what I would say to vendors is sit down with folks, ask them a lot of questions, try to really understand the problem. And if you've never been in public sector before, maybe spend a little bit more time. It seems like that's another big piece too, because you get a lot of folks from private sector that are now trying to service the public sector. And for us folks, I'd love to buy your tool, I'd love to buy your solution, it might actually help me. But having to understand the hurdles that we have to go through and all the different assessments, all the different procurement rules, let alone going through legislative session to get funding, sit down and really understand all those different hurdles and be patient. But I'll kind of say in closing as well, make sure you bring a lot of documentation. Because I know, especially with AI, everyone wants to buy some tool that's going to help resolve all of their FTE gaps or any of their technical debt, and that's great. But I need to know what that LLM is doing. I need to understand the learning data. I need to understand everything under the sun, because the second I go ahead and purchase that, I might have a legislative hearing that comes up and says, well, you and your team need to now report back to us why you're using this tool, how you're using this tool. And by the way, show me all of your use case documentation, show me all the documentation from the vendor. And if I don't have that information and I can't speak to that, that creates a lot of issues. So for today's event, this is my second round of being a part of PSN. So I'm an advisory board member, and so I've helped plan and do some of the workings behind the Government Innovation Show in Colorado. This is my first time being in a different state. What I've seen so far is really, really endearing and nice. Having spent 4 years of my undergrad out here in Ohio at Ohio Wesleyan, I really wasn't as involved in government because I was more of a finance economics major, so I just wasn't on that poli-sci side of things. But to see the audience really be receptive to talking about innovation, talking about all these really forward-thinking ideas is endearing, again, because it's a conservative state. There's not a lot of opportunities where change management can come in and really shines. But to see a room full of government folks from the state of Ohio really embracing change is really cool to see.